Hey, everybody, I have a bit of a cry for help. I am teaching a new course on diversity and inclusion in design in the fall, and I need your input. If you have done work in diversity and inclusion in design, have thoughts on it, have cases and examples you can share, please do. Shoot them over to me at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. I'm looking for real life examples from listeners about how diversity and inclusion plays a role in your design work. So feel free to share with me what you've done in the past, what worked, what hasn't, and what your hopes and aspirations are for diversity and inclusion in design. And you can share those at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. I am very much looking forward to hearing from you because design a class ain't easy. So make sure you shoot me those examples and your thoughts around diversity and inclusion in design. I very much appreciate it. Now, on with the show.
1, 2, 3.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. Hello, experience designers and EXDers. I hope you all are doing well. I am back from my trip to Florence, Italy, and am literally covered, dripping in history right now. It is impossible to go to Florence and not be. Unless you are a college student who is doing study abroad and only know about Raphael, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Leonardo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon and movie. If you're anybody else who cares about history and art, you know how important Florence is. It was kind of crazy to be able to walk around and casually see works of art from the 1400s. It's easy to say things like Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance, but when you see it in person, it makes quite the impression. Staring at a Giotto or Botticelli or Caravaggio leaves a mark on your soul, on your mind, on your consciousness. Being able to walk streets or sit in piazzas, thinking about the centuries of footsteps that preceded, puts one life in a certain perspective. And speaking of perspective, I don't know if anything quite prepares you for standing in front of the statue David looming over the crowds. I mean, it's pretty big, perfectly proportionate, but on a whole other scale of size. And that was sitting in front of other works of art that were not completed by Michelangelo, where you could see the strike marks in the marble. It's crazy. It wasn't just the past that was impressive, though. It's the present as well. There are artists who are working on the streets, showing their beautiful works in front of other beautiful works while people walked by in beautiful fashion. Beauty upon beauty upon beauty. While there, I even had the chance to take in a Mark Rothko exhibit, who, interestingly enough, was influenced by Renaissance art and visited Florence many times. So much art, so many museums, so many ways to tell the story of this history. And this is why it is good timing to have Will Humphrey of the agency Sugar Creative on Experience by Design. Will started out as a fine artist himself, having his work exhibited as many artists would. His education combines degrees in graphic design and communication with molecular genetics, which is a pretty interesting combination, you have to admit. Today, he is the director of creative and innovation at Sugar. At Sugar, he is part of a creative force that combines augmented reality, virtual reality, storytelling, and history together to bring the past into the present in immersive ways. We talk about Sugar's project on the American Revolution that will allow users to experience pivotal historical moments through interactive experiences. And it is kind of funny, you have to admit, that a British agency is working on the American Revolution. No hard feelings. Will shared the inspiration he received from his grandfather, who developed anti-aircraft balloons during the Battle of Britain. We share our appreciation of video games, especially those with historical features and lessons, such as Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I mean, I didn't know there were Vikings in the British Isles until I played that video game. I mean, who knew? Will talks about how they are working with Ubisoft, who created Assassin's Creed, to combine gaming and history to make for immersive learning experiences. Will also shares insights from his work on geolocated experiences, highlighting the value of immersing oneself in a set of ideas and understanding the physical and historical context of a place, which again is something I was doing in Florence, is getting that physical and historical context of place by immersing myself in it. We also discussed how physical transformations, such as landfill in Boston, affect our understanding of history and the importance of considering the nature of a space in design experiences. And for those who don't know, there's a lot of Boston that is landfill. It was actually a pretty tiny place back in the day. We cover a lot of ground in this chat, which is about as much ground as I covered walking around Florence and its many museums. Hope you enjoy it. And you'll have to pardon me if my voice sounds a little husky, but I have a little bit of a cold, I think.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it could be a cold, could be COVID, could be a cold, could be some other variant of a new disease that we haven't identified yet, which shortly will
You could be patient one.
I would love to be patient one, because at least I could put something of note on my in my obituary. He was patient one. I mean, it's
The problem
something.
is, if you are and it's something serious, no one's going to read your obituary because we're all going to be dead.
That's true too, but at least I'll have that to take with me into the afterlife of
Sense of achievement.
Some sense of achievement or accomplishment. And I do remember that, as my daughter, my middle daughter, was hacking up a lung earlier, that when someone used to clear their throat not too long ago, it's almost like they detonated a bomb, and people would just kind of fly away about how quickly people forget the history of that. Or maybe they don't. I mean, I don't know. I wonder about, to what extent are we, did COVID really make a mark in people's psyches, or are we just overblowing it? And how will people who weren't around remember it in future generations?
I'm not sure how much it is true in the US, but in the UK, there is still massively a work from home culture. There's still a distance, and we've got an entire generation who hit university where they had formative years where they didn't really speak in person to anyone.
Right.
There is a massive issue with communication skills, interpersonal skills, and you see it in workplaces. And I do also think there's a hesitancy, a fearfulness, yet a lot in the UK, just in general. I think we do still have a legacy.
I really appreciated the social distancing because I was naturally good at it. It felt like one of those in a movie where your superpower is unveiled. And it's like, wow, this is what I was meant to do. This is what I'm naturally good at. I found my thing. My thing is social distancing, is being away from people and not engaging with them. It was like in Tinkerbell, what's my special talent? Social distancing. And
very useful.
Well, I don't know. Like, how would you create a game or VR experience around social distancing?
It's an interesting one. It's the absence of a thing, isn't it? It's
right.
What encourages you to be a part, and what does that then reveal? I do go on retreats by myself, like a few days out in the wilderness, me and a 10, because I think it does recenter your brain. There's definitely something you can do with that, I think. Yeah.
Something to think about, right?
Yeah, it's good. It's an interesting idea. If you can have yourself not in contact, if you have every device pinging,
right,
and then the longer you're away from people, the more your visibility expands. So it becomes a paradox.
Right.
You definitely play with that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but the first thing I want to talk about is, how does someone go from molecular genetics to graphic design and communication?
It's a fair question. Because I didn't start in molecular genetics. I started aged 3 with a paintbrush and pen in my hand, pretty much on my mother's ankles as she was painting. She was a fine artist, learned how to paint from her. So my first love was always pen in hand, creating art. I then fell in love with science in school, when this is how the world works. This is how people work. You start to unpack genetics, and you're like, this is the building blocks of everything. Went to uni, fell in love with it, specialized in all sorts of fun stuff, but realized that people didn't understand why I loved it. I had to do consultation with people with genetic conditions, and you try and explain these really complex ideas. And it's not their fault they don't understand it. It's your fault because you're not explaining it right.
Right.
which took me into behavioral psychology and communication theory to be able to better understand complex ideas. And I found myself naturally arriving back at art, that universal language principle, how you're sharing big ideas with simple forms, which then led to going and studying at a place called London College of Communication. There was a professor there who built a course around having people with non-design skills coming to learn design.
I love it.
Which is such an interesting idea. So I was studying alongside mathematicians, professional writers. I obviously brought a load of science to the table, and then we had this amazing culmination of what it is to make and what it is to communicate. So yeah, that's the flow.
You could have always gone into medical illustration. I know somebody who does that.
It's such a cool thing to do. I genuinely, King's, where I studied, they had a medical specimen library from the Victorian era, and I used to go in my downtime and sketch the medical specimens.
Right,
creepy as hell, but absolutely stunning.
And I love the art. As we're talking about the designing the absence of something, it kind of reminds me a bit about drawing the negative space. Right. I mean, you can bring in the form of something, not by drawing it, representing it, but representing the spaces around it, which then brings it into, reliefs, as it were.
That kind of that absence principle, but also then the reductionist principle. A true master of anything is how do you do it with as fewer words, fewer marks, fewer gestures as possible. Which I always loved.
And does that inform the kind of the work? Does that ethos kind of inform the work that you do at Sugar?
It does. I would say less so than the idea of empathy. So my artistic process is very much rooted in French Expressionism. What am I depicting? I'm depicting how I'm seeing it. I'm trying to put someone in my shoes. And that is a lot of what we do at Sugar. Obviously, it's problem solving. It's all the good tech stuff. But if you have to boil it down, it's I want you to be able to see through my eyes, or I want to build a tool to let me see through yours. So it's that empathy thing that's at the heart of art that we look at.
Yeah, it's art as a way of bringing one into another world. I remember, God, why am I blanking on his name now? He did the painting Slave Ship. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, and I can't.
Joseph Turner. Yeah. I think it was Joseph Turner, but last name for sure is Turner. And I remember seeing that at MFA here in Boston, because that's where it is. And it just kind of stops you in your tracks, because for those who never saw it, it's like what might be a picturesque view of a boat sailing into the distance. But then as you look at the waves, you see hands that have chains and manacles around them reaching out of the water, because these were people who were taken as slaves who were thrown overboard. And it's, this subtle but yet powerful expression through artistic representation, which really connects, for me at least, in a greater way than words or actual photographs would. I don't know why, but it was just something so moving about it that really just captured me in the moment as I was walking by it. And it's not prominently displayed. It's just displayed as other paintings are displayed.
I love the fact that you saw and you observed. You're like, oh, that's beautiful. And then the hook of the horror within it. I think that juxtaposition gets really fascinating. And also the fact that you are ending up curious. A lot of what we do is to inspire curiosity. I do volunteer teaching, and a lot of that is, can I just get you curious about a subject? Because after that, you're going to do all the hard work for me.
Right.
I love your response to the artwork being, oh, what is that? Oh, who are they? And then you start to feel empathy, and then you start to engage, and then you're starting to get curious about why that could have ever taken place.
Right. And I'm kind of interested about this idea of the genetics as the genetic metaphor of it, right? Because I actually have a daughter with a genetic condition, extra numbers of things that shouldn't be there. And I did horribly in biology when I was a freshman in high school. But then you start to realize the precarious nature of something like a genetic code, that there are long arms and there are short arms and there are chromosomes and there are all of these things, and there are deletions and there are duplications, and of the precariousness of having something turn out okay is pretty great. And when we think about that, it's a miracle. We all have something going on. There was a really nice book called Freaks, which was about, we all have something genetically, some of which is more obvious than others, and some of which are positive adaptations versus negative ones. and how that precariousness translates into the representations of humanity and place and culture, and thinking about we're fragile. Society is fragile, but robust.
Because it's adaptive and it changes, and that change is really fascinating. But also, as you just said, the idea that the things that make us as people have become the things that define the societies we built, even down like how we see, how we touch, like our relative senses. Matt Ridley wrote a lovely book, which I think is called Chromosome. Genome? No, it's called Genome. And he goes through each chromosome and picks out a specific gene in each one, and then looks at some interesting history behind it. Medical history, cultural history, sociological history, and kind of breaks down that impact. It's one of the books I always recommend when people go, science doesn't affect anything. I'm like, you couldn't be more wrong. Here, read this, and then come back and tell me.
People say that science doesn't affect anything.
You would be amazed how much science is put in a box. I can't speak to it in the US, but in the UK, I have had so many conversations where science is this abstract idea that the scientists do.
Right.
But you see the same with engineering, as if these inventions, these changes in society just suddenly magically appear rather than the product of work and investigation. I think that's dangerous because you don't connect the choices people are making in the areas that they're studying with the impact. And that split is not healthy.
Well, I definitely see it in the United States, right? Where people are, the ongoing, this even goes back to COVID, right? The ongoing questioning of expertise, especially in this current environment where, even recently in CBS News, they have a new anchor under new leadership, and he said something on his first day to the effect of, we're no longer, I'm paraphrasing, we're no longer just going to listen to the experts. We're going to listen to you. Like, have you met us? You don't want to listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about.
When talking about making a brick wall, I guarantee it's going to fall down.
Yeah, I don't know. It goes back to this thing where people used to talk about people vote for a person they most want to have a beer with. I'm like, look at the people you're having beers with. You don't want any of them to be president.
I love my friends dearly, but half of them are idiots.
Right. On a good day. And so this idea of we don't need the experts. I know more of what's good for me than you do. I'm like, you really don't, because you haven't studied it. I mean, maybe to a certain level, but I don't want me to fly the plane. I don't want me to do my surgery. I want someone who knows what they're doing.
But it's the paradox of learning. Learning teaches you how little you know. And it's one of the reasons why I love it. I love being asked a question and being able to turn around and say, I don't know. Because it's then cool. What don't I know? Like, how's that impacting the rest of my life? And how can I change it? How can I learn more? That's where I get really excited, like learning, understanding.
So how much do you try to veil, almost like putting, something that's good, like your broccoli, in something that, kids might not want to eat their vegetables, so we're going to kind of hide it in something that they do like? How much do you try to, in the work you all do, embed learning in a way that people may not even realize they're learning, but it's just part of the process of experience and engagement in the environments you're creating?
It depends on the project, obviously, but in a lot of the work we do, obviously we work with some clients and they're like, yeah, just make us this tool, solve this particular problem. But if it's left to our own devices, if we're working in culture spaces especially, that drives a lot of our decision making. Like, how can I make you care as much as the people who care about it already? And sometimes that's hiding the broccoli, but a lot of times it's teaching people that their preconception of broccoli isn't really the case. Just by getting them to eat something or describing something, like I'm putting it in front of you. It's green, it's luscious, it's interesting. And then 5 minutes down the line, oh, by the way, that was broccoli.
Right.
I've done some mentoring for young people, and one of the things we do is explore food, and getting them to eat eel for the first time is always great. I'm a massive fan of a Japanese barbecued eel, 100%. But you go, especially to English people, and go, I want you to eat some eel. No. Convince them to eat some eel fried rice, and by the end of it, they're like, this is delicious. What is this? By the way, that was eel. Sorry about that. Little bit of deception there.
Right.
But it's getting people to engage with the thing, being confident on what you're delivering, that it's fun.
Yeah. And so any projects you can think about where this was the case? I mean, besides the barbecue deal, which I've never had, but now I'm intrigued by.
Yeah,
So
unagi, absolutely delicious.
is it?
So good. Projects wise, we're doing a piece at the moment that's going to release later in the year around the American Revolution.
I've heard of it.
It was announced quite recently, Echoes, and it lets you step back from the streets of Boston and New York into moments inside the American Revolution. Americans are already preconditioned to have ideas around it, great, even have interest around it. But we wanted to make sure that there was a real rich history, working with historians from Gotham Institute and from Revolutionary Spaces in New York and Boston, respectively, to find the bits of history that people might not know about. And through play, let them softly engage with it. The losses as well as the victories, which was one of the fun things as a Brit making this. So look at the defending of the Hudson. The HMS Phoenix, the HMS Rose, blockading New York. American forces had taken New York, holding the battery. Ships running up the Hudson to try and block American troop movements. Americans running to their posts, running out the guns. Right, we are going to sink these ships in the channel. Firing again, realizing that they couldn't shoot for love nor money and were missing and were barely denting the British ships. And being able to, it's one of the moments you step back into, being able to go and do that, being able to realize again, we were talking earlier about the fragility of a moment, the fragility of, oh crumbs, this might not actually go to plan. This, because we know what happened, but to be in that moment and to have that fear, I think is really, really fun. Same with, I hadn't realized this until I was speaking to some historians in New York, how close the American forces came to be completely wiped out after the Battle of Brooklyn.
Oh, really?
If it wasn't for the dark that the American forces fled across the East River into Manhattan after the defeat, Washington would have been captured, the remaining forces would have been captured, and that would have been the end, at least of that revolution. Probably wouldn't happen again, but it would have ended then and there. And it was on a knife edge in that moment of fragility.
It's a fascinating thing. I want to talk more about that project, especially since I'm in Boston. But even when I've looked at World War II history and some of the pivotal battles that have taken place, like a Midway, you're like, wow, like how that came out the way it did is miraculous because of this knife edge. So many things went wrong. And some of that going wrong was led to the victory. That, the notion that, no battle plan survives the first shot, that everything just kind of goes to pot as soon as the conflict begins, and understanding that these things weren't preordained, that this was, there are ways that history could have forked based on these moments, and understanding that little things can make big differences in the span of time.
And that those little differences are more often than not human. They are human frailties, human braveries, and it reminds you that the history is not some distant idea. It's just a bunch of people like us doing something that was in front of them. Which takes us again back to the idea of empathy. History isn't just something you read in the book. It's something that people did. And if we can start to think of those people as like us, you start to have a very different understanding.
It was very similar to an episode I recently had about the National Medal of Honor Museum in Texas. And, the main point that they were trying to drive through the museum was not these people are extraordinary individuals who are not like us. It's these people are exactly like us. And to inspire visitors to see that in themselves, not just so much in terms of heroic acts on the battlefield, but acts of service, integrity, responsibility, selflessness in everyday life. That this is you. They are a one of you, and you can embody their traits and virtues in your life right now.
By making it not so abstract, making it not so foreign, it poses both the opportunity and then a really positive challenge. One of my big inspirations is my grandfather. He was instrumental in developing the anti-aircraft balloons during.
Oh, really?
And a whole bunch of medals, all that whole thing, as well as developing one of the first programs to get disadvantaged children into vocational training.
Okay.
And was lauded for that. And I look at these things and I look at how he was as a person, and it's a challenge to me. I don't look at it and go, oh, that's something he did that is distant. I look at it and going, that's a torch that I am carrying. It is a responsibility on my part to do something interesting, meaningful. It's not some like, go be a hero. It's go and be good in your life. Go and make art that's worth making.
Yeah. And I think that, looking at what you do is even around this, representing these stories that are not typically known. It's not just a cool technology, but it's an artistic expression, right? That VR, AR isn't just a shiny gadget. It's a palette that one can utilize to, create empathy, affect emotion, things like that.
Mm. And it's been amazing working with the guys at Niantic on this, because they get that. It's the reason why they built this incredible mapping company, because they want to be able to turn place into canvas, and they want to give people the opportunity to tell a story. So it's so much fun to be able to work with interesting people exploring exactly those ideas.
And it's but the revolution tends to be a prominent fixture here in the Boston area, as one might imagine. We tend to have monuments all over the place to it, even to I don't know if have you seen Patriots Day Live? The live manifest. I mean, I have not personally, but I live 13 miles from Concord, so it wouldn't be too hard to go do it. And there actually is. Patriots Day is the third Monday of the month in April, and it's also the day of the Boston Marathon. But it's this, live reenactment of Lexington Green, the march of Redcoats to Concord, and then the skirmishes along the way on what's called the Minuteman Trail, right? And so there's actually, from area towns, including mine, people who dress up and they march towards Concord to join in the fight. And it's one of the key elements of that Lexington Green piece is that, a lot of the Minutemen were drunk because they were facing down the British Army. So they come out of the tavern and they face off, and, it's the things, in many ways, the United States was founded on guns and alcohol, which might not be terribly shocking.
Show me a culture that wasn't.
And
might be Windy Stakes if it's a bit earlier, but fundamentally.
Yeah. The lived experience of it, and seeing the reenactments as a way of seeing it in 3 dimensions and not just as a 2-dimensional text or a painting.
And it's where technology can really help us. Like, you don't have to wrangle a few thousand half-cut Northeastern Americans into a field. You can build these experiences and let people go there and see it. It becomes simpler and a bit more accessible. Don't get me wrong, I love a good reenactment. I fence and have been trained for many years in different swords, and do reenactments from medieval period. And I love it. But for accessibility, for the numbers of stories you want to tell, digital tools just make this so much more accessible, so much easier.
I had a guest on way early on in the podcast, and we talked about this overview effect. I don't know if you're familiar with the overview effect, but it's this notion that people, when they go into space, astronauts, they get overcome with the fragility of life. This is like a small planet in this vast space of seeming nothingness, and that this is all we got, right? And so we got to take care of it. And not everyone can go into space, but how can we use AR, VR, these kind of immersive rooms to teach this to students, to young people, about the fragility of life on Earth, and this is what we have, and if we don't take care of it, we're kind of screwed. And so how do we use this technology to create this overview effect?
Yeah, you're just giving people the ability to be transported to somewhere else, to be someone else. You're letting them step outside their own skin, and in doing so, you have this incredible set of effects. We know this is true. Like, this is why we've had art. It's a continuation of these principles.
And one of the things we're seeing right now, at least in the United States, I don't know if it's the same thing in Britain, is almost an attack on empathy. That empathy as weakness, not as virtue, empathy as limitation, not as advantage. And that to be empathetic is to be weak rather than strong. I guess two questions. Are you seeing similar kinds of movements in Europe and in Britain, but also how does that relate to then the work you do in trying to create greater empathy?
I think we've been seeing it since the 80s, in particular.
Yeah.
On one side, what it is to be male, which really needs a profound looking at culturally, but also that idea of golden gecko, greed is good, sociopaths, like they become the leaders of the world, and then leaders being overtly sociopathic, feeling bad about the idea of saying, I care. Because the idea is that if you're empathetic, you're not logical. I don't subscribe to that at all. Like, I think our empathy, our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes informs our logic because it helps our understanding, and understanding lets us make better decisions. The natural place for this is in culture. It is where objects and people and art has told stories. When you have a museum, it is a collection of things to let you understand people. So yeah, there is a gap, but I think we're moving. We're gonna come back to it. It's a good moment.
Yeah, it is. I like the optimism, and I try to retain optimism and understand also historically that there, are ebbs and flows in these things. And as you said, that whether it be Thatcherism or Reaganism of the 80s, which was it's kind of like me generation, this focused on individualism as a pathway to better society. And now even in the, going talk about New York and the American Revolution with the election of a new mayor in New York, which is a different view of our responsibility to one another. And again, it also goes back to COVID, right? I mean, one of the things about medical messaging was, am I wearing a mask to save me? Am I wearing a mask to help others? And how do you position that message to resonate more culturally with different audiences?
Yuval Harari talked much more eloquently than I ever could about that social contract of caring for each other and how that's the origin of social groups. And that's so very, very important when you think about empathy, because you're going, okay, it's not that it's not me, it's that I am the empathetic target of somebody else. And that collectively, if we can do that, you have shared usness runs shared themness, which is really, really interesting.
Speaking about the male thing, and we've talked before about, video gaming, one of the things about, quote unquote males today is whether or not they're just kind of online, not building relationships face to face, whether they're learning what it means to be male from these online environments and even gaming, right? And so I start to wonder, and one of the things I started playing video games for was, are there especially AAA games that kind of teach us these lessons about empathy, about morality, about responsibility to one another? Or are they teaching us more of a, not being empathetic, taking advantage of others who are less powerful, and only thinking about oneself? And are there any AAA games that come to mind that do the former better than the latter?
I think there are, and I also like the fact that the way you framed that is not rooted in violence. Because one of the things that I often hear is that violence is intrinsically cruel. And the idea of empathy should be against violence. It's like, no, because it requires strength to defend what matters.
Right.
It's about how you are framing your stories, how you're framing your decisions.
Right.
Spec Ops The Line did it really nicely.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand in defense and in advocacy of Assassin's Creed games.
Right.
Their history is good. They're placing you inside a historical moment, and it's encouraging curiosity. It's why we end up working with Ubisoft. So those Boston, New York projects, they're using assets from Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Rogue that were lovingly recreating that era of America. And it's lovingly because the historians cared about the history. They wanted you to be there. They wanted you to be in these moments. So yeah, I think there are lots of games. I think there's obviously some that aren't. It appeals to our baser instincts. Pornography exists, but there is also beauty that goes alongside it. And I think games is no different.
Speaking about Assassin's Creed, the one game that I played all the way through was Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And the first time we chatted, I was joking that up until that point, I didn't realize there were Vikings in the British Isles. I'm like, wait, there were? When did that happen? How come no one told me?
There aren't just Vikings then. I mean, the Viking blood stayed. Like they never left. York used to be Jorvik. All the place names are still Scandi-inspired names. Half of our language. Thursday is Thursday. These are not accidental components. These are a mingling of history. It's also then where big topic globally. What is it about movement of people? Should we isolate ourselves? Should we welcome? Is a culture pure? Is a culture unique? Well, no, every culture is an evolved version of itself. We talked earlier about genetics. Same basic principles can apply to cultures, combining, mingling, fragile, but beautiful in their ability to change. And I think that's where Vikings being part of a British culture forms something that's cool, something that's interesting, but also something that really expands how you're thinking about societal groups.
One of the experiments I wanted to do that I never did, but I think it'd be kind of interesting, is to have people play a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or whatever as a female character, lead character, as a male lead character, and to see what impact that has on their perception and view of the game, because I played as a female character, and it is different. It does feel different because I'm walking into the game with my societal preconceived notions about gender, right? And about relationships. So when I have a female Viking who is, slaughtering a bunch of people, it's an interesting experience compared to if I had a male Viking doing the same thing.
I would imagine the impact of that is largely going to be based upon those preconceptions and how much your culture has embedded a lot of those. I am very fortunate in that one of my good friends, their grandmother was one of the first people to be dropped into France. A lady, multilingual, and then was an absolute badass.
Right.
Murdering Nazis right, left, and center. So I grew up with stories of this idea that female strength isn't just in the home or as a homemaker. This female strength is on the battlefield, like in the boardroom, wherever it happens to be. But I think it is largely missing. And I think some of the missing is simply the stories that we're not telling, like that one. If we're telling these stories, it's very hard to ignore that the reality of the situation.
And the extent to which it's been interesting with video games, the extent to which female protagonists have been greater number in ways that are not just, Lara Croft kind of these caricatures of female anatomy, where if I'm playing like right now, Horizon Zero Dawn Forbidden West, or playing The Last of Us, or playing Assassin's Creed as a female character, that I do think it'd be interesting to see if there's any impact on this kind of male psyche of the hypermasculinity that can exist in online spaces, where if it has any reframing of their perceptions of these gendered stories because of their engagement with these characters in a game environment.
We can see that it does simply by how much vitriol there is, because anger doesn't come from feeling comfortable. It comes from feeling like you're being put off kilter. And as soon as your preconceptions are challenged by things you're seeing, things you're doing, you're getting angry about it. It's perfectly normal human reaction. It's just, as a grown-up, you kind of look at it and then move on from it. But you'll see a lot online where the anger comes from feeling like something doesn't match. Cognitive dissonance is the shrinky term. And I love it. I love creating cognitive dissonance because you've forced that reframe, you've forced that questioning. My girlfriend is perpetually irritated by me because I am contrary as all hell.
Right.
But it's part of how I understand the world. It's part of how I look and try and be a better human, trying to find those things that don't match with my own worldview to try and be better.
Well, this is one of the things that people are debating right now here in the United States is, oddly enough, whether or not education should challenge preconceived notions. And there are places in the United States, for instance, where people have said very explicitly, no, that the job of education isn't to challenge someone's beliefs or preconceived notions, introduce this cognitive dissonance, have friction. It's to teach maths, to use the British expression of math, or to teach quote unquote science, as if any of those things are neutral.
Yeah.
Right.
They wouldn't exist without that friction.
Right.
You're only ever looking backwards. Education looks backwards so that you can look forward, because otherwise you are stopping progress at you. You are part of this continuum. So again, why we've been talking about history, because history is looking back to look forward. And for me, that education process is one of understanding that at some point, people didn't understand that the concept of zero existed.
Right.
And from that, we then have these new types of maths, and then theoretical maths evolving, and then how you have the application of maths to quantum physics, and the idea of doubt, and the idea that you have non-specific Schrodinger's subatomic particles where your brain starts to melt. Like, how can this not be full of friction? We are a moment on this continued journey of learning. So education without that seems terribly dull.
Yeah, and not education. It's just its own form of indoctrination, right? Because neutrality, quote unquote neutrality can, be the advocate of the status quo, right? That there, these power relations, these histories, these dominant perspectives do exist. And if you say, well, we're going to be neutral, then in many ways you're not challenging those things. You're not calling into question those things. So neutrality isn't just not participating or not giving a point of view. It's endorsing the current point of view, whatever that is.
I also wouldn't want to assume that just because something is challenged, that it is shown to be wrong.
Right, exactly right.
And I think it's really important that the challenging process also has the ability to show that something isn't true. Like, I can advocate the idea that the moon is made of cheese to you right now, and I'm challenging your worldview. But you're going to bring the entire weight of science to bear to demonstrate that I'm an idiot and it's clearly not made of cheese through a whole bunch of processes. So it's not always that challenging creates change. It's that it creates certainty. And those certainties let us build further.
And it's a really important point, because even with the moon is made of cheese, we do have people running around who are like, the earth is flat. And we're like, well, there's pictures that show otherwise. And they're like, yeah, but those were just, manufactured, not real, whatever it is. And that's fine if that's your belief. But at what point do we let unfounded belief or unchallenged belief be, introduced as a option into, sanctioned thought or certified thought? Like, yeah, we should teach the earth might be flat in school because it's a point of view. Should we?
We all know where that line needs to be. And I think the best way to approach it is often through humor. Like, I always go back to Tim Minchin, Australian comedy songwriter, amazing line from one of his songs. Is rationality so loose weave of a morning? I think I'm misquoting him. So loose weave of a morning when deciding to leave through the door or the window of your 5th floor apartment. We know the points where we are going to apply reason and we are going to be comfortable applying it. And you then start to say, if you're really not comfortable applying it to these perfectly sensible moments, what motivates you to not apply it? Is it fear? Is it opportunity? But even that, just the act of questioning, the act of bringing all these things to light makes the whole thing a lot less scary. And that's where I find it really interesting to build experiences.
So when you're developing experiences like you talked about with the American Revolution project, before even thinking about what's technologically possible, feasible, what you want to design for in that environment, how much time do you devote to some of these baseline conversations about what we believe, what is the assumed narrative, and what are the things being left out?
Never enough, because there's always more that you can learn. But the simple answer is a lot. I love that first bit of the project where you're immersing yourself in a set of ideas. You're separating all the things you think you know from just listening, learning, engaging with different people, different historians, and also walking the streets of a place. The thing that is amazing about geolocated experiences is that they are taking that and then rooting it back to the place where it happened. So invariably, when we're designing these things, we go out not just speaking with historians, but dragging the historians onto the streets and saying, show me where this took place. Let me feel it. And listening to all of these different ideas and trying to say, okay, what does this make me feel? And then going from that back to the kind of experiences you want to make.
It's interesting in a place like Boston, because Boston itself, especially when you head towards Back Bay, it has been physically transformed to such a huge extent that it's essentially not the same physical place because so much of it has been filled in. There was a really nice book called Boston Riots, and it was a historical examination of why there were a peculiarly high number of riots in Boston compared to the other colonies. And one of the things it went into was the geography of it, that, look, it was a barren neck. You had Boston Neck, this little part of land, spit of land that went out into this larger land structure that jutted out into the water, which now doesn't exist because it's all filled in, right? That, things were knocked down to fill in Back Bay, and anything that's flat around Boston is basically landfill.
Yeah.
And so how do people don't even recognize what it would have been like back then because it has been physically transformed. So how do we bring them back to right here would have been water where you're standing?
Yeah, and you show these differences, place them inside of it. I also love how you're really cognizant of the idea that the nature of a space informs what happens inside it. It's not just the people.
Right.
If you put a big flagpole surrounded by pubs, you are asking for trouble. Like, you go out, you have a few beers, and then you start saying, do you know what's wrong with this country? Human nature. It doesn't matter which side, whatever you happen to be on, and then you put a big flag outside of it, you're going to get these moments of tension, and they're going to build and they're going to change. And that weird thing of, why does violence not happen in the suburbs? Because nothing really happens in the suburbs.
Right.
Because there's a whole load of nothing. But when you start to get these incredible melting pots, these incredible mixtures, we talked about friction, people with different ideas next to each other, that's going to create these exciting moments.
Well, in many ways, sociology was born out of the friction that occurred with the Industrial Revolution, right? That it was, whether Durkheim or Marx or Weber or whomever, Twineese was like, well, as people have moved into the cities more, and as things have gone from agrarian to industrial more, stuff is changing. And the past societal structures and glue are no longer holding because of the changing locations, geography, economic relationships, all those things. So what I do, how I was trained, is born around studying of that friction.
We're also at the moment where it comes to a point where it's repeating itself. Like,
oh, absolutely.
We can't look at AI without constantly referencing the spinning Jenny riots.
Right.
We're looking at a seismic shift in technology. We're looking at something that's affecting how people work, the kind of jobs they have. This is not just like generative AI bits and pieces. It's like automation. It's the movement away from people driving most practices into something where technology is driving it. And we've seen this before. We know what happens. And are we capable of having this discussion around it whilst understanding that? I really want to do a piece around spinning Jenny riots. I want to remind people how we've been through these processes before, because it's that friction moment that we can learn from.
Remind people what that event was, those riots were.
In very short form, you had a new piece of technology that significantly altered how cloth was made.
Right.
So you moved from large numbers of people spinning, weaving at home, making thread and cotton, into an industrialized process whereby all of those small cottage industries where cloth was being made is now centralized, industrialized, significantly less people. And it removed the incomes, removed their ability to live by this one thing occurring. And it resulted in mass riots in the UK. It was a huge thing. And we're at those points again, going, how does it shift? And obviously, we came back from it, like, people adopted this technology, people found ways forward. There has never been a piece of technology that's driven us forward that has not been adopted, except Concorde. No one knows quite why Concorde disappeared.
Yeah, why did that disappear?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's quick. Just wasn't needed.
Looked cool.
Yeah, looked cool. It was
Had that nose cone that kind of dipped down. Yeah.
But apart from that, everything else has been adopted, has been utilized, and obviously, it goes back to what I was saying right at the start around genetics and wanting people to understand why genetics is interesting. Looking at genetic engineering of plants to be high yield, environment resistant, the ability to remove world hunger, technologies that are being adopted slowly but surely, and that then have knock-ons.
I think it's important, going back to those riots, to keep in mind that those who call into, or those who voice concern over the impacts of these technologies are not simply quote unquote Luddites who are smashing the looms, that they're actually, being these contrarians who are questioning the assumptions. It's, as I tell my students, just because you can do something technologically doesn't mean you should, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't. It means that we have to take a very hard look at it from a lot of different perspectives to understand the impacts that it's going to have in intentional and unintentional ways.
You can never put it back in the box. So it becomes our duty to use what's out of the box and use it well, and use it in the benefit of us. This tool should service us. We shouldn't be servicing tools.
So in that way, do you think of the tools you use and the work that you do you think of Sugar as a technology company and or an education company and or a art company and or all of the above?
It's a creative technology company because we invariably are using an infinite number of technologies. We're agnostic to those technologies to creatively solve problems, build experiences. We are creative technologists. It's become a bit of an old hat term, but I really love it because it's, so long as your emphasis is in the right way. We're not creatively doing something which is to service technology, but we're creatively using technology to do something that couldn't have been made before.
And I think
find the edge of something.
I think it's important that it's not this quote proverbial tail wagging the dog, right? It's not, this is, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but you can use a hammer for many different things other than pounding a nail if you're creative in how you deploy the technology, as long as you're deploying it, to advance something positive and not to, bang somebody's kneecaps.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry about that. Technology will always have a huge array of potential uses, and that intelligently and creatively using it is where it gets really exciting.
And what are some of the technologies that you are either excited about, number one, but also that are really reliable in terms of, I know what it's going to deliver? I mean, there's a risk of the new making the old feel obsolete, even though the old still has a lot of value and utility because it's a proven thing.
Yeah. It's not instead of, it's as well as.
Okay.
No one has stopped listening to music on the radio, on audio devices, because we have TVs. No one is saying that you should burn the books because you have a mobile phone.
Some people are saying you should burn the books. Some people are.
That's pretty much as close as you can get to the bad guys in almost any situation. If you find someone and they're saying burn the books, they're the bad guys.
Right.
History
you are the bad guys. You are the bad guy.
Sorry about that one. But I have a huge library. You can't see it here, but most of my house is wall-to-wall books because it's a pure way in which a story is told to you. I also have a PS5 and a PC and a couple of headsets and some mobile phones because these things live alongside each other. It's not to replace. It's to look at where the technologies can do something something else couldn't. We did a piece with Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
And the challenge was Dr. Seuss's ABC, an incredible book for learning your letters with incredible characters. We'll layer some technology into it. What technologies do we want to layer and why? Not to replace the book, but to do something the book can't. So interactivity is an obvious one.
Right.
Interactive drawing. So I'm learning the letters and then I'm drawing the letters and then rewarding people with something that their imagination always wanted to do, seeing the characters come alive. So each page of the book, you hear the rhyme, you draw your letter, and then the character comes alive as a reward for doing so. It's not instead of the book, it's alongside it. It's taking it into the next phase.
And there's a lot of opportunity there, especially in a VR environment, to create that empathy, not just as might be a good learning tool because it's very engaging, interactive, it's visually expressive, it might have great resonance. But also I think about, there was this effort of VR for good, where there are documentaries where it might be just a 360-degree camera that's utilized. Like I remember one about being homeless and, one's homeless camp being disbanded by the police as a way of creating empathy for those who live in that environment or experience that thing. Or there was a really nice one called The Green Book, which the Green Book was a book that was used by African Americans in the United States when they were traveling to figure out where they could stop and stay overnight and where they shouldn't. And so there was this VR recorded kind of environment to express what that was like.
Yeah. And I think they are incredibly powerful tools. But again, they're not taking the place of other forms. To explore what it is to have race and to be despised for different reasons, you go and you look at Othello. Like, you go and watch Othello on stage.
Right.
And you will be moved. You'll be moved by Iago's incredible poisoning out of envy. You'll be moved by Othello's deception and the way in which he kills his wife. These are beautiful, complex, but it's not the only way of telling that story. And what I want to do is find new ways with the technology telling the story as well.
Yeah, without losing track of that, the old ways have resonance too, that going to the theater physically has value still. Just because I can experience it in VR doesn't mean that, or watch it on TV, those are other ways of experiencing it, but not necessarily replacing the original way, which was, going to the Globe Theater and watching it in person.
Yeah. There aren't that many stories. We know this. It's the same thing. It's just the human condition. It rolls around again. It's one of the reasons why I love geolocated experiences in particular, because of that street becoming almost a theatrical space.
Right.
When we go and see a piece of theatre, we imagine what it would have been like to take place there. So The Crucible, one of my favorite plays, to be able to do that on a street and show the relationship of the people within the space and how people's fear and doubt works within a small community, works within a small village. That then builds the physical nature and tells the story in a different way. Lets you have a different idea about it.
It almost reminds me of Salem, going up to Salem, Massachusetts, because everyone knows about the Salem witch trials, but they really don't know about the Salem witch trials. And then it becomes a matter of, well, if you go up to Salem today, there might be a museum here, there might be a sign there, there are certain kinds of markers or indicators, but it doesn't really take you into what it was like to be the person who was being accused of being a witch, or what it was like to be on trial.
Yeah. I always think of Bosnia. So my partner went out relatively recently, did some volunteer work dealing with victims of the concentration camps there. And she had never really appreciated something she brought back, and we then went and visited. The nature of the markings on the doors being next to the people that you knew. The fact that it was really intimate, that you'd wake up one morning, you'd see marks on people's doors, denoting the fact that they were the bad guy. This wasn't some abstracted thing. This was on the street in front of you. And that, for me, really brings it home.
And one of the things, as we kind of knock this around, that I think about is the fact that people forget. We always talk about never forget, but no, people do forget. And when people are like, well, we need to take up arms against blah, blah, blah. Sure, in some instances, there might be good reasons for defending the things that you think are worth defending. But the impact that actually has, that, Saving Private Ryan was lauded for showing realistically what the storming of the beaches at Normandy were like. And it wasn't like the war movies where the person just looks like they're sleeping. When we forget how bad it is, then we are more likely to commit those same atrocities again. And how do we remember?
I don't always think it's violent acts. Sometimes it's the absence of a traditional violent act. I've been doing some bits and pieces around assisted dying.
Right.
And my own family experiences, having seen people decline and the suffering that they endure.
Right.
And going, do you know what? The kind thing is something that we're missing, because we abstract ourselves from their suffering and we hide it away in buildings. We don't let ourselves experience it in the same way. Like, if you are moving the horror away from you, it's harder to look at the impact of your decisions.
I actually was almost on a trial for Dr. Jack Kevorkian.
No, well.
Yeah, because I used to live in Royal Oak, Michigan, which was where he lived, and I occasionally saw him walking down the street. For those who don't know, Jack Kevorkian was one of the original, I wouldn't say proponents. Was built a device which would allow people to die, by their own hand, in a way that was seen as being, humane. And he was put on trial in Oakland County, Michigan, and Royal Oak, Michigan, and I was called into jury duty as a potential juror. Yeah, and it didn't end up working out for a variety of reasons, but yeah, it was kind of wild to see him just like walking down the street because I just lived in downtown Royal Oak.
It makes me think a lot about the role of a jury trial and the role of that empathy piece of the number of jurors. 12 Angry Men.
I was just going to say
just
that.
The most beautiful thing, like a required viewing for every person in every society, wherever you are in the world.
Right.
Because you are going through that dynamic of fears and understanding. To do geolocated VR pieces that let you step into that can be so powerful.
And I would say 12 Angry Men, not the remake. The original black and white one would be the one I would go for.
I kind of forget they did actually try and remake that.
It was, the same script, but it was just, I don't know, it just hit differently. I don't know why, but it just definitely, even though it was exactly the same, the script was the same, it was in a jury room, it just didn't hit the same, maybe because it was in color, maybe it was because of the composition. I'm not quite sure, but it just didn't feel the same.
Yeah, I often look at Mamet's work with Glengarry Glen Ross.
I was just going to think about Mamet and Glengarry Glen Ross.
Just that perfect intersection of artistry, scripts, performers to make incredible pieces. And I would love to create something 1/10 as good as that, 100th as good, because it's those things that genuinely help shift the needle on cultural understanding. To Kill a Mockingbird, the film adaptation, the book moved the needle. Film adaptation moved the needle again. What's the next version of that's going to move the needle on our understanding?
It reminds me a little bit of The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, because one of the things Sinclair said is that I was aiming for people's hearts and I hit them in the stomach, because the book resulted in a more federal oversight on meatpacking, but not necessarily any change in how we treat immigrants.
Unexpected side effects, some of which can be just awesome. And I was talking about this recently, and I cannot remember the name of the book. It's a book written from the point of view of a horse, and it's completely gone, but it details their life and how they're mistreated, and it was reflective of horses' condition during that time period. And it resulted in an enormous shift in how animals were treated in society.
Right.
It's an awful book. It is so dreadfully written. It's so saccharine. It's an awful piece of literature by almost any metric, but it worked and it had this incredible impact. So sometimes I remind myself of that, going, do you know what? I don't have to have the most beautiful art in the world. Sometimes it can just be, and sometimes it can have some benefits.
You never know what's going to hit people. And it's one of the things I always try to keep in mind as a parent, but also as an educator, is that the offhand thing you say might be the thing that connects and resonates.
I think we all have that, don't we? The kind of moments that we look back on that you're pretty sure it wasn't supposed to be some great learning experience, and it just was.
Yeah, you weren't supposed to be listening to me then. Yeah, but you weren't supposed to remember that, but you were, and oh dear, I'm sorry. And so, as we kind of wrap up with this moment about what's the creating the thing that moves the needle, what kinds of things do you have your eye on internally at Sugar that you're hoping can move the needle, and what needle is being moved?
We're looking at some history pieces, obviously some culture pieces. I'm really excited by a future-looking piece of going, okay, we've looked back, we've used geolocated experiences, we've told stories from history, but what if we move to imagining multiple futures? If we take our gaze and then look at the streets as they will be 100 years hence, 200 years hence, 500 years hence. I'm a massive sci-fi nerd, I make no bones about it, and the idea of layering some of that into the process, I think could be really, really exciting.
Well, I think that's exciting. And I think it's needed to, imagine different futures and We actually had an episode on the podcast with, futures forecasting, and, the fact that what we do now can create different futures then. And that if we can imagine these different futures, which one do we want and what do we have to do now to move us towards that direction?
It's one of the things that I live in Wales, and I'm very glad that I moved to Wales out of London. Wales has I think I'm right in saying, the only piece of actual legislation looking at that question. It's a thing called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Makes the people who are alive today responsible for the impact they have generations hence. And it is a constant, we talked about challenge and inspire. That, I think, is a really good example of how state can inspire and challenge people.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Will, to talk about sugar and talk about art and molecular genetics.
Yeah, just talking about stuff. It's been absolutely great to be here with you.
I want to thank Will Humphrey for joining me to talk about art, graphic design, storytelling, technology, and history. You can find out more about his work and Sugar Creative in my links in the show notes. Did you know that Florence has great coffee? Do you know who else has great coffee? My website, where you can buy me a coffee to help defray the cost of the podcast. So if you would be so kind to head over to experiencexdesign.com and buy me a coffee, I would surely appreciate it. And while you're there, you can drop your email and subscribe to the EXD newsletter to be part of the EXD community, stay on top of all of the EXD news. I promise not to share it with anybody else. It's mine and mine alone. So put in your email and get all the news that you can use around experience design. You can also share feedback at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. Tell me what you like about this episode. Tell me what you like about other episodes. You can also tell me what you didn't like, but I would really love it if you liked what I did. That would be nice. And if you have any ideas for future episodes, let me know that too. And be sure to keep me in mind for any event you have planned around experience design, whether it be corporate training, whether it be professional development, whether it be a lunch and learn, whether it be a keynote talk. I'm always interested in spreading the word of experience design. So shoot me an email at gary@garyconnects.com, or you can DM me through LinkedIn. I look forward to hearing from you and working together. And with that, as always, be kind, be safe, and be well, and be here next week for the next Experience by Design. Bye.